We're going to begin our notes on genetic crosses. Remember to fill in your outline notes. You can stop, pause, or rewind this at any time. Our topic for today is how things are inherited. So inheritance is when genes are passed on from the parents to the offsprings. This process is called heredity. If you recall from last chapter, chromosomes are made up of individual genes. There are several genes on each chromosome. A chromosome that you inherit from your mom and a chromosome that you inherit from your dad have the same genes. So if this is gene A, you'll have another gene A over here on your dad. On this same chromosome, you can have several genes. Let's say you have gene B here. You can also have a gene B on your dad's side. You can have a gene C, and on your dad's side, you'll also have gene C's. These are called like genes. Notice they're found on the same place on each of these chromosomes. These chromosomes are called homologous chromosomes because they have the same genes. If we were to list these words from small to large, we would begin with DNA, then genes, then chromosomes. If you recall our review of meiosis and fertilization from chapters prior, chromosomes come in pairs because you inherit one from mom and one from dad. During meiosis, they separate. So during the formation of gametes, you have half as many. Remember, gametes are known for the sperm and the egg. Another word for the sperm and the egg. So each of these chromosomes will contain a gene. Another word for a gene, this is new to us, is an allele. And you inherit one of these genes from each parent. Here's some picture of homologous chromosomes. Notice the traits are across from each other on the homologous chromosomes. Remember over here you can see the word allele, which is another word for gene. Sometimes the genes will be the same, like here. Sometimes they'll be different. And here's another one where they are the same, meaning they both are green. Allele, another word for gene. There are different forms of the genes. So for height, you can have a tall allele or you can have a short allele. For pea color, you can have a yellow allele or a green allele. So the form that we're going to talk about is called complete dominance, where one allele is completely dominant over the other. So one of these is going to be shown up as a dominant trait to the other, as in Mendel's terms, dominant and recessive. There will only be two alleles for each trait that we're going to study in this particular chapter. In the future, we'll talk about multiple alleles that come up with eye color and blood type, but that's the next chapter. So let's go over what complete dominance means. A dominant allele is a trait that overpowers all the other alleles or traits. We usually represent this with a capital letter. Let's use A today. So this would be a dominant trait. A recessive trait is one that does not appear to show up as a characteristic if this dominant gene is also present. And we use a lowercase letter a to represent a recessive allele. Remember, each time we use these letters, it's the same letter. The difference is whether it's capital or lowercase. So let's look at an example. So if the characteristic is color, we could have a brown allele, in which case it's showing a dominant trait, or we could have a blue allele, which is showing a recessive trait. Now remember, we inherit one of these traits from each of our parents. So our possibilities that we can list is we could inherit a capital A from one parent and a lowercase a from another, so it would be written this way. I mean a capital from one parent and a capital from the other. The other option is getting a lowercase, a recessive gene from one parent and the same recessive gene from the other parent. And the last possibility is if we get one capital letter, one dominant gene from one parent and a recessive gene from the other. So remember that this one, allele right here, is saying that we've inherited a brown allele from one parent, and over here, a blue allele from the other parent. For the characteristic of height, let's practice this. So if there are two capital T's, what trait would this show? If you said tall, you are correct. If there's two lowercase t's, what trait would this show? Now remember, the lowercase letter would be the opposite trait, which would be short. So if you get a short allele and a short allele, you're going to be short. This last situation is when you get a tall allele and a short allele, and as a result, the tall is going to dominate the short, and you will have the trait of being tall. This is also known as a carrier. This is an important word that you're going to see over and over again. So a carrier is when the genotype, the letters that we're using to represent the trait, one is capital and one is lowercase. Okay, so whenever you have this situation, the dominant allele will overpower the recessive one, and it will have that characteristic of that dominant trait. Some terminology we'll be using is the genotype, which means it's genetic makeup. What kind of alleles does it have? Does it have dominant? Does it have recessive? So when you think about genotype, think about the letters that make it up. So the examples we've used so far, this would represent the genotypes. Phenotype is another. This is what is physically expressed. This is what the trait looks like on the individual. So think about phenotype as what words would you use to describe it. So this would be like the words tall, short, a color such as green. It reflects all the traits that are expressed. Homozygous has the prefix homo in front of it. And if you recall, homo means like or same. So in this situation, the word homozygous is going to describe when both alleles are the same. So if the word is homozygous, it means the same, and then after that, it tells us that it's going to be dominant. So we would write two capital letters. So notice I switched the letter used, but the notation is the same of using two capital letters. If it's homozygous, it's going to be the same, but the recessive tells us that they're both going to be the same, but recessive, which remember we use the same letter, but two lowercase letters. Other words that mean homozygous is the word pure or purebred. So this is a synonym for that. Heterozygous is another terminology used to describe the genotype. Hetero is a prefix that means different. So this is a situation when you have two different alleles, such as a capital and a lowercase. Some other words that also mean heterozygous are hybrid and carrier. So here's this word carrier that we saw before. So this is when you have both forms of the allele. In this case, a capital, always, and a lowercase. And we always denote with the capital first, then the lowercase. That's the notation that is used. A Punnett square, which is also known as a monohybrid. Mono is a prefix that means one, so we're just going to be using a Punnett square with one particular trait. This is a graphic representation that's going to help predict for us the result of a genetic trait. So for example, let's say Dad has a trait or alleles, his genotype is that he has a capital A and a lowercase a. So he has two because he inherited one from his mom and one from his dad. Mom, let's say she has the same particular trait. Let's do a Punnett square to see how this would look like. So when you take Dad's alleles, you're going to take one letter and write it on the top. The other letter is going to come on the top but on the side. Let's look at Mom's alleles. She's going to write her alleles over here, and then the other lowercase a is going to come over here. And the way you find in a Punnett square is the letter that's over here comes across. Can you see where those capital A's came from? And then the letter over here comes across as well. And then if we go back, you can see that the dad's genotype is going to come down, and the small a comes down. This capital A comes over, and as I mentioned last slide, that you always write the capital in front of the lowercase. So instead of putting the capital A behind the A over here, I'm going to put it over here so that it's a capital then lowercase. But the A did come from up high, and this red A came from across. So inside of these boxes represent what the offspring genotypes would possibly be. So this represents a child that would have two capital letters, two dominant traits. And the other boxes represent other possible genotypes of the children. So this represents having 4 possible offspring. Let's make a Punnett square for this particular trait. So let's talk about a pea plant that is homozygous round. So we know homozygous means they're both going to be capital or lowercase. Because round is dominant, we're going to use 2 capital R's. Let's say we cross that with the opposite trait, a homozygous wrinkled, which is going to be represented by 2 lowercase letters. When we write our Punnett square, we're going to take one parent's genotypes and put them at the top, and then we're going to take the second parent's genotypes and write them on the side, and then we're going to fill in the Punnett square. When we're done, if you look at our results, we have that their genotype is that they are all capital R, lowercase r, and all meaning 100% of the time. Phenotype, which means what do they look like, in this case, all of them are going to have the dominant trait, which is round, because the capital letter will override or mask the recessive trait. Let's do another example. We're going to cross 2 flowers that are heterozygous for seed shape. So the parents' genotypes are going to be capital R, lowercase r. So we're going to put one parent up here, the other parent on the side. We're going to bring them over. And when we look at our results, we find that the genotypes, we have a yellow. So we have 25% capital R. So 1 box out of 4 is 25%. And then we see that we have 50% are the hybrid, capital R, lowercase r. And then the last box is over here. You can see there's 25% lowercase. If we look at our phenotypes, you can see that the dominant trait is going to be found in here, here, and here. Because of the capital R, will always show you the dominant trait. So our phenotype is going to be 75% round, and then 25%, 1 box, is the recessive trait, which was wrinkled, lowercase. Let's predict the genotype for another example, where we have a homozygous dominant. So since we know it's homozygous dominant, it's going to be 2 capital R's. And we're going to cross it with a plant that is heterozygous. And if you recall from our lesson, heterozygous means a capital R and lowercase r. So we're going to do a Punnett square over here on the side. Almost done. Bring these R's down, and here we have our results. So if you look at the genotypes, we have 50% of them are capital, you can see them in the top boxes, and 50% of our offspring are capital lowercase, which you can see in the bottom. And the phenotype, which means what will it look like, will these plants, what shape would they be? Would they be round or would they be wrinkled? 100% of them would be round because there is a capital letter in each one of these genotypes. What Mendel found works in pea plants also works in any organism, whether it's a plant, a fish, a monkey. And so here is a picture of a woman who has an albinoism, which is a recessive trait. And the only way you can have a recessive trait is if you've inherited 2 recessive alleles. So the genotype for this particular woman is going to be lowercase a, lowercase a. Well, that's the end of our cross here. Thank you for participating, and everything's been fantastico. So have a good day.